Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. I'm Jeremy Stuart, and this is Scott Noelle. And
Hi,
in this
Jeremy.
week's episode, hi, Scott, how are you?
I'm great. I'm great.
In this week's episode, we're going to be flipping the tables a little bit. Last week, if you tuned in, you're aware that Scott kind of put me in the hot seat there and asked me some
It
questions.
was so
Uh,
much fun.
It was an interesting format, and I quite enjoyed the experience. So we thought this week it would be fun to kind of flip that, and it's my turn to put Scott in the hot seat and ask him some questions based on the chapters that we're covering today.
And like
So,
you, now you had a good excuse why you hadn't reviewed the chapters, but I don't have a good excuse. I just barely reviewed them because I thought I could get away with it.
you bad boy,
I'm
you
so
bad boy.
bad. It reminds me of my school experience
Yeah,
because, I mean, throughout grade school and high school, it was always just thinking about what I could get away with. Um, could I get away with not doing that homework or doing it at the last minute?
right. I did similar things, yeah.
It had nothing to do with learning or
Right.
enlightening myself.
That's the
So,
rebel in us. We
yeah.
both have that rebel spirit. Well, I
So,
guess we should.
so throw. I am yours.
All
I,
right.
I, I
So,
throw myself at your heels.
okay.
Do what you
Well,
must.
this will be fun. So let me just quickly mention the chapters that we're going to go through here. We're going to do, get my notes together. Psychopathy,
Oh,
or psychopathy, however you want to pronounce that. Evil, story, disruption, miracle, and truth. Quite a
mm,
broad spectrum of things.
fine. But I feel this. You could clearly. This is the moment of turnaround. This is the moment where we have gone to the depths of the depths and then turn it around.
Yeah, it's sort of the turning point in the book where that sort of last act of the book starts to take shape. So here we go. I'm going to jump right in.
Okay.
So,
Are
first
we going to
chapter.
try to do this in 15 minutes?
Yeah, we should. We should.
The attempt to
Keep.
get it to 15 got us down to 30 last
Yeah.
week.
Well,
So I
let's
think,
let's let's aim for that.
all right.
So here we go. So, psychopathy. So Charles writes, "What if the psychopath isn't someone born without feeling, but rather someone born with an extraordinary capacity for empathy and sensitivity to emotional pain? Unable to endure its intensity, he shuts it off completely." So I was really struck by this, and I'm just curious. This is really a question, just a general question I thought for you. So popular media is constantly bombarding us with negative imagery and stories of horror and suffering. Do you think that on some level we are becoming numb? And if so, then aren't we inadvertently creating a whole society of psychopaths?
Wow. In 2 minutes or less. Well, so the first thing that came to me as you were talking about this was the the pondering that I've been through as a result of, in some cases, feeling as though I had not lost compassion, but sort of in some ways risen above uh, the interpretation of suffering as bad or wrong or terrible. Um, in other words, when you do spiritual exploration and that sort of thing, sometimes you get a message like, well, it's all an illusion, it's not real, or we create it through our interpretation of reality, that sort of thing. And it's easy to then start to see that some people really are creating their suffering. And it changes, it doesn't mean you lose compassion for them, but it changes the way you feel compassion. You don't you don't necessarily feel as inclined to commiserate or to you don't necessarily feel the pain in the sense of empathy, feeling with the other. You don't feel the same thing they're feeling, but you have compassion, but you don't feel it. Do you know what I mean? Because you know that at some level they're creating it. or it's an out picturing of their story, and you don't want to necessarily reinforce their story.
Right.
And so it becomes this difficult thing of, well, I don't want to commiserate and sort of amplify the suffering, but at the same time, I want to be compassionate. And to the extent that I don't feel their suffering, it has sometimes led me to think, am I becoming a psychopath? Do you know what I mean?
Right, right. That's why it's an interesting question. I thought he sort of presented that in a very interesting way. So
It is, and I'm not exactly answering your question because you're talking more about a
right.
defense. And I think those two things for me have been a little bit confused sometimes. Sometimes I'm really rising above their suffering and seeing it in a broader perspective, maybe from a more enlightened point of view. Other times I'm just shutting it out. And I think for anyone who's on this sort of conscious living path, that is something that you have to watch out for, right. That you don't inadvertently shift from an enlightened perspective to just shutting off your compassion.
Right, right. Well, good points. Good points. Let's move forward. Because it gets darker.
That was a great question. Yeah, let's go even deeper.
Evil. Evil. So Charles writes, when we speak of the dark side of human nature, we are making the dispositionist claim that we do bad things because there is bad within us. Scott, in your bio for RE, it says, Scott Noelle...
That's Rethinking Everything.
Rethinking Everything. It says, Scott Noelle believes that people are born good, open-hearted, trusting, and full of appreciation for the gift of life. But do you also agree that we all have a darker side? And if so, how do you work with your own dark side?
So I have been challenged on statements like that before. And I do need to qualify what I mean by good. And right. Because I don't intend to forward this sort of rainbows and unicorns kind of naivete in any way, but I think by good what I mean is that life is essentially good. Life is essentially the universe's desire to expand and grow and play. You know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? The way life emerges has this kind of goodness to it, and and you can interpret it through the lens of the old story and say, well, what about dog eat dog? The world of the jungle, that sort of stereotype. It's a jungle out there, and it's eat or be eaten, But I really think that is an anthropomorphic projection, to ascribe evil to the animal that hunts and kills another is not understanding life in a very deep way. So I don't mean by good that the lions and the gazelles would be holding hands and
right.
That's not all what I mean, but life is this platform in which amazing creations emerge. So in that sense, to me, life is good, and that all those potentials exist, and all of those drives toward expansion and play and love are there in the newborn child. That it is innate. It's in our makeup to have that kind of drive and purpose in life, and it gets distorted, by the kinds of experience, and that's the sort of the situationist thing. That the children that become bad, so to speak, are under the influence of of their life experience, of the story that tells them they are bad, or that they're unworthy,
Mm-hmm.
or that they're powerless, or that the only way to get power is to steal it from someone else. And all these things, I think, make, undermine this innate goodness. But if we raise children and educate children in ways that honor this innate goodness, and if we interpret any sort of seemingly bad behavior as a kind of the action of either a frustrated or confused individual, someone who lost their way, then instead of punishing it out of them, we just simply help them, find their goodness again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious. I would think that I sort of look at it as that we have equal capabilities of goodness and badness, and that we're just as capable of evil as we are of great good things. And this, as you said, the situationist thing, certain situations will perhaps trigger our tendencies in one direction or another. And I think we're always sort of navigating that.
Yeah. But the thing to remember is that, and I don't disagree with you, but I do like to remind people that, even the people to whom we ascribe great evil, they never stop wanting to be loved,
Right. Right.
That drive toward love and connection is always there. And they may be so confused that there's virtually no possibility of them ever really coming back into alignment with their good potentials.
Mm-hmm.
But in my view, it almost never really goes away. Maybe in some cases it is so buried that it's virtually gone. But I choose to believe that it's still there.
Mm-hmm. Great. So story. Charles writes in this chapter, when a story is young and hale, it has a kind of immune system that insulates its holders from cognitive dissonance. New data points that don't fit the story are easily discarded. And then a little later he writes, when a story grows old, none of these immune responses work as well. Inconsistent data, even when dismissed, leaves a lingering doubt. So my question to you is, so what part of your story has grown old? And what lingering doubts are you left with?
Oh my God. So, what part of my story? Okay. Lately I've been struggling with the aspect of the story that involves scarcity, and particularly scarcity of time. The feeling that there's never enough time to do everything I want to do. There's never enough time to do the work I want to do and spend the family time that I want to spend. There's never enough time to write the books I want to write, There's never enough time to do this podcast.
I can relate.
And so that's one area where it seems to be getting worse, hopefully before it gets better. Sometimes that's what happens. The story sort of amplifies before it disintegrates.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would like to be in a place where my story of time becomes an old and abandoned story.
Mm-hmm.
What was the rest of the question? What was the last part of the question?
Well, he says, when a story grows old, none of these immune responses work as well, and inconsistent data, even when dismissed, leaves a lingering doubt. So, what lingering doubts are you left with as your story changes?
Yeah. Yeah, and I find myself, with regard to this particular story I have about time, I find myself actually getting data points that support the story. but I mean, the disruption to the story is, for example, you and me doing this project and talking about it and raising the possibility that it's only an illusion, this scarcity. Um, but but then yesterday, I woke up at 8:30 in the morning, and I started doing things that I thought were important, and before I knew it, it was 8:30 at night. I was like, where did the whole day go? I didn't even get to that other productive thing that I was going to do.
Yeah.
And you know, there's this theory that as you get older, time goes by faster. That has seemed to be true to me, and
Yeah.
I ascribe that to the fact that I just have a broader perspective. I've lived longer, so each unit of time is proportionally less.
Right.
But I think what I'm being led to do is to think completely outside the box of how I quantify time, or how or even what my scope of time is. I'm thinking of it even just in terms of a limited lifetime. That, you know, a broader, I'm connected to a broader consciousness that transcends time, that transcends the concept of a single lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm playing around with that, and in that sense, my story is being disrupted. But but in the meantime, I'm just pissed off because
I can totally relate. My days are the same way. There's just I'm so busy with stuff, and there's no time to do anything. It's just crazy. It drives me nuts too. But you segued very nicely into the next part here, which is disruption. So Charles writes, to be a change agent is first to disrupt the existing story of the world, and second, to tell a new story of the world, so that those entering the space between stories have a place to go. So my question to you is, can you give us an example of how you have disrupted the existing story of the world? And what new story are you trying to tell in its place? And you've kind of answered that a little bit, I think, with the example you just gave about this idea of time.
well, that
Is there
yeah, because my entire career is sort of built on what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, as a parenting coach, and I don't even like to call myself a parenting coach. I'm a life coach
Mm-hmm.
who supports parents, specifically parents who are wanting to disrupt the old story. And so I am their sort of assistant disruptor. That's generally what I do in a coaching session. People will call me, and they'll describe a challenge they're having, some sort of struggle, and what I do is I sort of look at and see what their blind spots are, where they're not identifying the old story. I don't usually use that terminology, but you know, and to say, well, here's the premise you're operating under, and here's another possible premise. You could look at it this way, and I show them this different perspective, and it completely disrupts their old story. And usually there's this sense of liberation. It's what makes my work so satisfying, to be a liberator and not, you know, participating in any sort of, you know, like consumer imprisonment, which I think so much of what people are led to do in their work are just participating in this imprisoning system of consumerism. But I feel like I am privileged to be able to free people from all that. And I should probably give you an example. Like,
Well, you sort of have, in a sense, you know. I mean, I understand the work that you do, and I know that that's pretty much, as you said, a constant. You know, you're constantly disrupting the story and giving people new ways of entering a new story.
yeah. Let me give you. I'll give you a quick
Yeah.
example. A recent coaching call with one of my clients, where, you know, she was really frustrated. She and her husband were frustrated with their 2-year-old's whining. And I help them reframe it in terms of, well, we tend to think of, when a child is whining, they're being bad or demanding or manipulative. And instead to say, put yourself in a situation where you have a need, but you can't express it. You do not yet have the capacity to even understand what you need. You just know that some sort of need is being unmet. And all you can really do is, so that completely freed her from the concern that there was something wrong with her child, in the sense of, innately wrong or bad about her child.
Right.
And that the challenge then, like now she knew what to do. I need to figure out how to understand what my child's mysterious needs are, help her understand her own needs, and help her learn the language of expressing them.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Cool. Miracle. So I have to go to the book here because there's a little bit I wanted to read. Here we go. So, so Charles, at the end of this chapter on miracle, kind of lists several sort of possibilities of this, and I'm just going to read a few. So, when one is aligned with the purpose of service, acts that seem exceptionally courageous to others are a matter of course. When one experiences the world as abundant, then acts of generosity are natural, since there is no doubt about continued supply. When one sees other people as reflections of oneself, forgiveness becomes second nature. As one realizes, but for the grace of God, so go I. And then he has several other ones. I'm not going to read them all. My question to you is, can you recall an experience in your life that you could clarify as a miracle?
Mm-hmm. Oh boy, so many. I mean, anytime you have that shift, a miracle is a shift in consciousness from perceiving something wrong or bad to suddenly realizing that all is well. And I've had, trying to think of a good example. I feel like forgiveness is sort of the quintessential miracle, because when you forgive someone, you are you're basically taking a lot of negativity and just making it disappear. And certainly, that can be done in badly by stuffing feelings down. That's some people, I would call that maybe pseudo forgiveness. But when you truly let go of seeing the other person as bad or evil, and then your heart opens and you connect with them at that level, that to me is a miracle. The only example that's coming to mind right now is from when I was about 20 years old. Maybe it's a little older than that, but I went through a rough patch with my girlfriend. I had a long-term girlfriend, and we had just kind of broken up. And and because of that, my best friend decided it was okay to sleep with her. So I had this incredible, painful feeling of betrayal by my best friend. And it was so painful, I actually, despite being in my 20s, I called my mother, and she came over and cradled me while I rocked me while I was crying. But somewhere, I guess I was actually studying A Course in Miracles at the time, which is a kind of a spiritual treatise on these sorts of things. And so I was I was open to the idea of forgiveness. That and my friend and I got together. I think we ended up. He needed me to pick him up from a gig. He was a lead singer of a band, and he had this out of town gig, and so he needed a ride. And I went and picked him up, and we ended up driving home together and kind of working it out. And what it boiled down to was, at the end of the day, I just love you. I can't hate you. And I was able to forgive him. We actually held hands. That was one of the most poignant memories that I have of brotherly love, because it was bigger than our perception of scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I let it go, and we stayed friends, and I think I got back together with my girlfriend for a while too. So there was forgiveness all around.
Yeah.
But to me, that was, it felt like a miracle.
Yeah.
To go from this devastation to more love than before.
Yeah, and I love that's a beautiful example, and I love how that example and some of the ones that Charles highlights in this chapter, that we think of miracles as sort of like the parting of the sea, and all these like huge, massive, inconceivable things, when actually miracles are simple, everyday acts of love and beauty. Can be miracles, and I really liked how Charles brings it down to that level, and your story there is one such example of that. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah,
I think any act of unconditional love is a miracle relative to the old story, which says that love can only emerge under the right conditions.
Right. Yeah. Right. Great. So we're on the last chapter, truth. I loved this chapter. This was really, to me, this is the most poetic part of the whole book, I think. Charles actually, there's something about the language in this chapter and just the sentiment in this chapter that I found incredibly poetic. So I'm going to read a little moment of this. The silence, the stillness, the soil, the water, the body, the eyes, the voice, the song, birth, death, pain, loss. Observe one thing that unifies all the places I listed in which we can find truth. In all of them, what is really happening is that truth is finding us. It comes as a gift. I just loved that. Out of the whole chapter, that it kept coming back to that one passage. So, and he plays this little game. He writes about this little game that he played in here with someone about finding what is true, asking the question, what is true? So you present different scenarios, this side of the story and this side of the story, and then the other person listens and asks what is true and what is true, and your truth begins to emerge from that. We can't play that whole game right here. I think it would take too long, but I wanted to just sort of it might, yeah. But I wanted to sort of encapsulate that idea and just ask you, so what's true for you, Scott? Where do you find your truth?
For whatever reason, what's coming to mind is that I find my truth in I want to say in nature, but to me that has an even more impactful meaning. Not just nature like going out camping, going to the woods, but just right outside my door.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because, particularly lately, I spend so much time with my face buried in a screen, reading, writing, researching, distracting, various things that I will do as mostly as part of my what I consider my life's work. But then occasionally, usually my kids, and they'll say, "Come on, let's go outside." And I go out there and I feel this shift. It's almost like in The Wizard of Oz when you go from the black and white to the color.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's this aliveness, there's this deeper trueness about the direct world, the world of direct experience, that I'm seeing a tree directly. I'm not seeing a picture of a tree. I'm not reading or writing about a tree.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just beholding this tree. It's alive, and it has texture, and it has there's a way in which it is love.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the love of life for itself is there in the tree. And that so I feel like every time I step outside, I reconnect with that deeper truth. And I'm not saying that there are not beautiful truths inside my online relationships and on websites and places where we connect virtually.
Right.
But there's something about that truth that you can touch.
Yeah.
That feels deeper to me.
That's great. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I that resonates with me too. That's really great. Wow. Well, there you go. Those are my questions for you.
That's it?
Yeah.
Come on. There's
Yeah,
got to be more. This is too much fun.
I know it was good. That was good.
Well, so we get one more week of this.
Yeah.
We get one more week of this fun, and then we get to really take in all kinds of questions and offer all kinds of answers when we arrive at Rethinking Everything. And on, I believe it's the second day,
Mm-hmm.
you and I are going to get together with Charles and participate in I call it a trialogue, but also a whole community conversation, you know, inviting everyone to discuss these things and take it deeper. Is why I wanted us to do this, so that we could get through the main ideas,
Yeah.
and then really go deep when we arrive in Little Rock.
It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I'm excited. So what do we have on tap for next week? It's the last three chapters.
Next week would be, I think there's only three. Let's have a look. It would be consciousness, destiny, and initiation.
Right.
So that'll be great.
And I think we planned it to be only three at the end, intentionally, so we could kind of go a little more in depth and then maybe look at the broad arc of the whole journey that we've been on.
Mm-hmm.
And then be completely primed for our in-person exploration with the great and wonderful Charles Eisenstein.
That's great. Well,
you can tell I've been thinking about. My daughter was in The Wizard of Oz,
Mm-hmm.
of a stage production of The Wizard of Oz, so I have that on my brain. But it's funny to me.
They're great and wonderful.
There are so many analogs to some of these ideas in that story.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Scott. Thank you. It was actually really nice to do this little experiment. Last week, me being in the hot seat, and this week, flipping the tables there was interesting. It was interesting to think about questions for you too. I enjoyed that process.
I did as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to be on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up and then reconvene next week for our final episode of the chapters from the book.
Beautiful. All right.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Okay.